China EVs and more, where my co-host, Lei Xing, and I will go over the week's most important and interesting news coming out of the China EV, AV, and mobility sectors. What Lei and I discussed today is based on our opinions and should not be taken as investment advice. If you enjoy this room, please help us get the word out to other enthusiasts. And of course, tune in again next week. My name is Tu Li. I am Managing Director at Sino-Auto Insights, based consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility sectors. I write a free weekly newsletter that we pull many of our discussion topics from. You can sign up for it at sinoautoinsights.com, which of course I encourage you all to do. A just now entertained Lei, can you please introduce yourself?
Yes. Good evening from my side. Good morning to you too. This is Lei Xing, your co-host, former chief editor of China Auto Review. This is episode number 66, and it's our 1-year anniversary episode. So meaning that we published our first episode of the podcast on May 20th.
Complete madness.
So it's been a year. Well, it's been more than a year since we've been doing this, but it's been exactly a year since we published our first episode, and we're recording number 66. And it's very special number. If you're in China, you know 6 is a very auspicious number. 66 happens to be my daughter's nickname because when she was born, she weighed 3.3 kilograms. So if you multiply by 2, it's the Chinese way of 6斤6两, which is an auspicious number.
Yes.
And feeling lucky today because May 20th in China is one of those Chinese Valentine's Days because...
Oh, yeah, that's right.
520, so too, you better have the present ready for your wife or something. Or just say, I love you, right? Because 520 in Chinese, it sounds like 我爱你, which means I love you in Chinese. So a Chinese lesson right there. But a lot of new models, right? I just tweeted that it's an auspicious day. The BYD Seal, Ballet Cat, the Dongfeng Nissan Aria, and some other ones. I don't remember, but and most of all, right? It's 1-year anniversary, and I looked at. Before we get into your update and the headlines, I looked at the top downloads of the episode. I don't know if you had a chance. Only one download separates Henrik Fisker and Maxwell Joe. So Henrik Fisker is number 1, Maxwell Joe is number 2, and Dr. Wallenstein is number 3 in the rankings. And we have 2 more. Steve Levine's already number 8, and we will talk about that.
We are coming up on a total of 7 or 7,500 downloads already, right?
No, it's 6,600 or 6,500.
Soon enough, man. Soon enough.
We've been digressing, and a few other episodes listed in. Yeah, so it's been. I can't even think of a word.
Yeah, it's with COVID, it's just been a blur from a timeline standpoint, but I'm also getting older. So I heard that time moves faster when you get older.
It does.
But it's amazing because it doesn't feel like it's been a year since we posted, because it was, if you've heard earlier podcasts, it was kind of random that we did this. We didn't know each other before we did the podcast, frankly. We just decided to try out a Clubhouse room when I literally knew you from a panel discussion.
Well,
right?
when Clubhouse was a thing, it still is, but I guess we've moved on to Twitter and it's been working out okay, I guess.
Yeah, and it was just a random thought to turn the live Clubhouse room and now the Twitter space into a podcast. And I think we're doing a good job, Lei. I think that, and let me start by saying we would love more feedback. If there are particular areas, companies that you'd like to learn more about, please. We don't really have a formal channel to give us feedback, so we're working on that. We'll upgrade our website very soon. and we're working on a few other things to kind of formalize things a little bit more. But we know people like to hear about Tesla. We know people like to hear about NIO and the US traded ADRs, but we try to balance things because there are influencers that Western media and Western audiences don't know anything about. And Lei, the amazing historian, can tell you all about the history of 99% of the things that we go through and talk about. And, I'm just riffing and giving my opinion on how I think things are working and will work. So a few minutes of reflection and then...
I think we complement each other well.
I think so too.
And we're on opposite sides of the world. I'm supposed to be in China, but I'm not here in the U.S. And you're in China, so
it is an unique time to be doing what we're doing because you and I really started this because we both agreed that there needs to be a spotlight shined on what's happening over here because we knew it was going to penetrate into the European and U.S. markets. And sure enough, that's what it's been doing over the last 12, 14 months.
And we started out the Max episode with guests, and we'll be dropping our 7th Max episode early next week.
And we can give you a hint that it's one of the speakers for this week's TechCrunch Mobility Conference in San Francisco.
Oh, the suspense.
So... But we will have some fun guests. We will have some technical guests. We will have some business-oriented guests on in the future. Hopefully, a well-rounded European, U.S., and Asia focus. So stay tuned for those. We have a ton of fun doing those with Steve. As you guys know, we couldn't limit it to an hour because we just kept on talking and talking. But it was just every conversation that we have with anyone is actually pretty interesting. So,
and it so happens that when we talk about China EVs and more, you always begin. We talk about the EV, AV, and mobility sector, and our top 2 episodes are Henry Fisser represents EV, Maxwell Joe represents AV, and also mobility. That's perfect.
And we're gonna do our best to also have some more Western folks, US-based folks that might not know that much about the China market yet, but we're hoping we can educate them a little bit as we ask them questions and have our conversations on new Max episodes. So
let's get back to the topics. I guess, really in terms of update on the ground, I guess the one thing I'm thinking of to describe is this engine. It's you can't get it restarted, it seems. It's been stuck on neutral. That's the way I would describe at least Beijing. It's not getting worse. It's not getting better. It's just, right, in terms of the COVID situation. Shanghai seems to be coming out of it, but there's still these different reports of what's going on. And
Lei, it's just a reminder that these cities are so massive. A single neighborhood is going to be representative of most major cities in other parts of the world. So when the interconnections between a city like a Beijing or a Shanghai becomes more limited, they're still going to seep through just because of the size of the cities.
Yeah, and there's been, I think we can go right into the topics. We didn't list the topics, but basically the stimulus that are being rumored, Denza, QCraft. We can talk about. I think this is real. I believe it's real that the stimulus, that whatever form it's coming out, I would expect something to kind of, especially considering Shanghai was zilch, zero, nada in April. No car sales, virtually no car sales.
That's just an astounding statistic.
Yeah, and that's been reported in a headline. So, one stimulus. There's 2 things going on that's been reported. So, the extension of the NEV subsidies to 2023, which were supposed to end at the end of this year. So that's been put out there, and the other one is the rumored kind of the 3,000 to 5,000 RMB subsidies for vehicles, interestingly, priced below 150,000. Now, that's including both ICEs and NEVs. That's not been confirmed. I don't know whether you've seen any updates, but I haven't seen any confirmation of that.
I've not heard anything else about that, but yeah, I've not heard anything else yet.
And if you've seen the latest predictions from these banks of China's GDP growth, right, they've been dialed down quite a few times.
Almost full percentage point.
So there has to be, these consumption, right? There's people. The other thing really I think we kind of talk about is even if Shanghai, let's say it opens up completely, and how fast people go back to consuming cars, right? That's another question mark.
I speculated in my newsletter this week that there's going to be an incentive-laden summer for the car makers in order to try to juice car sales and build that momentum back. The rumors that you just talked about, how there's going to be potentially a 3,000 to 5,000 RMB subsidy or discount on vehicle purchase given by the Chinese government, that's effectively creating the same type of stimulus to get the market going again, right? So quick number for context. So Shanghai last year estimated to have bought 750,000 cars. So it's a big number for one city that drives a lot of demand and excitement to the sector. So 750,000, that's more than a lot of European countries put together, right?
And Shanghai is actually becoming a export base now because both Tesla and SAIC Motor, they're the top exporters. MG, right? Expect these to officially come out, whatever in the form they are. I believe there will be stimulus coming out.
And the big assumption that we're making is that Shanghai, Beijing, all these cities can eventually get to zero. It's not about containing, it's getting to zero. That's the whole strategy, right? So you and I believe that that's pretty much impossible. So
yeah, I was just going to say it'll never get to zero. It's these different terminologies that they're using.
Dynamic.
Yeah, whatever. I don't even know the English translation for these different types of basic zero, dynamic zero. They don't necessarily mean that there's no cases, right? But based on what's going on here, right, you see these waves. It gets better, then it gets worse, and it gets better. But
I feel the people that I'm speaking with, I feel that they're in the West, they're just treating it like the flu. And so it's not as serious as in the very beginning. So I'm wondering, so the realistic side of me believes that nothing opens up in China until mid-23.
One more year.
Yes.
Next year. Let's just say next year. And we've been saying that for 3 years. Next year.
So the Chinese government cannot say, it's just not politically tenable from a global affairs standpoint that they've closed the borders, but they've effectively closed the borders by canceling flights and limiting flights into the country, number one. And then number two, they were initially reducing capacity for international flights into China to 75%.
Yeah.
But they've now reduced it to 40. So
I remember some statistics put out for Shanghai's comparison of subway traffic. You've probably seen those numbers. I think they were in the thousands in the whole of April, right? That gives you an indication. But I it's getting better. The cases are coming down.
So one thing that might be an innovation here that we could see in the West very soon is that they've throttled a lot of the subway lines in Beijing. They've effectively closed the subway in Shanghai. And now I was reading that part of the subway, because now it's an e-subway pass that you can use like a QR code to enter the subway station or to enter the ramp. And it's going to be connected to your COVID status. So it's just going to be one thing. It checks your ticket and it also checks your COVID status. So, we had talked about this world where there's going to be these e-passes and everything's connected through data. And so that is likely going to be a reality in the rest of the world as well, somehow, some way. How they deal with it from a privacy standpoint, it's still up in the air. But, if COVID's going to be, if we're going to live with COVID and the variants, then there needs to be some sort of way to manage it, right?
Yeah, that 4-hour certificate that you can get out right in Shanghai, and then they probably will track, how long you're out, and if you're late, right, certain things will happen or something. But yeah.
And let me give this anecdote, Lei, because this week's newsletter, last couple of weeks, I've been talking about what's happening in Beijing on the ground. We've talked about it here in the podcast. So for Beijing, we're kind of in a holding pattern. Nothing's really changed. Everything's still closed. They've restricted a lot of things. But then this week's newsletter had a small bit about my adventures in trying to buy a plane ticket to the US. And within, so I send the newsletters out on Wednesday afternoon, or we send the newsletters out on Wednesday afternoon. And within 12 hours, because it goes globally, I had 6 or 7 emails saying, hey, man, people were giving me advice. People were giving me empathy because they felt my pain, felt my struggle. And so my challenge is, if you haven't read the newsletter, if you're not a subscriber, shame on you, number one. And number two, I'll give you a summary.
I read it.
My challenge is, thank you, buddy. So you're one, at least 6 or 7. So, because you want to be on one itinerary. So I can't buy these connecting tickets on separate itineraries. And so you're trying to fly through countries either via one itinerary so that you don't have to be quarantined, or find countries and fly through them that don't have quarantine policies for foreigners entering their country. And on top of that, so it's very limited flying out of Beijing. There's a ton of flights flying out of Shanghai, but number one, those get canceled all the time. And there's no way at this point in time I'm committing to fly out of Shanghai when things are the way they are currently. So that limits me to Beijing to LA effectively. There's 1 or 2 other flights that fly out of Beijing to the United States, but there's like a 20-hour layover here, a 10-hour layover there. And so it's like, but on top of that, I'm trying not to break the bank either, because outbound flights are cheaper than inbound flights, but they're still $3,000, $4,000, $5,000.
It's the return trip that's gonna be a nightmare.
Yeah.
So,
because I looked on the return side, and the cheapest ticket I found, because there's still uncertainty because it's 3 months out, 4 months out. The cheapest ticket I found was like $7,000 US. So
yeah.
Anyways, let's get back to
So Denza a little bit, because this was on Monday. Denza finally kind of put out this brand day and revealed the D9 MPV.
Can you give them a little background? Because for the first-time listeners or somebody who doesn't know who Denza is, can you tell them who the joint venture is with?
Denza started out as the joint venture between BYD and Daimler that was formed in 2010. And the joint venture then was formed as Shenzhen BYD Daimler New Technology Company, so BD&T. And then the Denza brand was officially announced in March of 2012, before the concept of the first Denza was revealed at the auto show, Auto China in Beijing later that year. And it wasn't until 2014 that the first production model was actually launched. It was again at the Auto China in Beijing that year. And I think the significance of this joint venture is this was the first sort of the tech joint venture formed by a Chinese company and a foreign automaker. And actually the OG of premium EV brand in China, if you look at it that way, way before these what we've been talking, lately. So that was kind of, I think both BYD and Daimler hoped that it was this new kind of
edgy, innovative.
and not a traditional, let's say, Shanghai Volkswagen or those type of JVs, but where kind of BYD already was starting to have its, technology, not technology, but it started EV early, and Daimler was kind of still in this premium brand and management technology wise design, right? So they put this together, but what was conceived, the first model really was very unorthodox. It's not a sedan, it wasn't an SUV, it wasn't a hatchback. And the pricing, if you remember, this model was launched in 2014 when the NEV market was still kind of in the infant stage. It was selling for more than 300,000 RMB, so ahead of its time. So since then, they've kind of updated the models quite a few times, and there's been injections of capital from both partners, but it just didn't, positioning-wise, model-wise, it just didn't resonate.
It just fell down their priority list.
Yeah.
Each individual company's priority list. And then now I think they see an opportunity to kind of reinvigorate the brand and the products.
And if you heard during the press conference, the event on Monday, Denza has naturally become the mid to high end. Okay, this is the key word, mid to high end brand from BYD, because BYD is launching a high end brand itself. That's still coming. So now BYD basically has, the BYD, like Mercedes. Mercedes now talking about the entry luxury, the core luxury, and the what's the word?
Ultra luxury.
Ultra luxury, right? The tiers. Now BYD has its own kind of the 3 different segments.
So what's old is new, because General Motors, their original strategy back in the 30s and 40s and 50s was a car for every lifestyle, right? So when you're a college graduate, you buy a Pontiac or a Chevy, then you move up to a Buick. And as you gain titles for your business and your professional status, then you move it into more prestigious vehicles, more expensive, more luxurious, and ended up in Cadillac. So what's old is new, right? That's effectively what they're doing. They're trying to create a set of brands where people can buy different brands within their portfolio, but stay with the company.
Yeah, and for a while, remember Denza then launched the Denza X in, I believe 2018, or the Denza X was unveiled in, I think, one of the Shenzhen Macau auto shows in June 2018. And then the production vehicle was only launched in 2019, so 3 years ago, and it hasn't done well. It looked like a Frankenstein BYD Tang, but with the Mercedes styling cues, because it's got that styled by Mercedes badge, but it just looked weird, even more weirder than the original Denza. And now they've come out with this MPV, and the electric MPV all of a sudden has become a hotly contested segment, right? We had the Voya Dreamer, and now Buick, right? Buick is launching another GLA. It's probably not a EV, but it's called the GLA Sentry. So, and there's tons of other MPVs coming out
with
as well.
With those huge grills.
Yeah, very menacing.
Which is weird because now you don't need a grill because you're an electric vehicle.
Yeah, I think it's somehow they've beamered all these MPVs. Yeah. But I guess Denza picking the MPV, and if you look at what the kind of the target customers, I just felt that they're trying to cater to a bit of every kind of families, business people, with the screens, but it's got all the BYD current technologies, right? The 3.0 platform, blade batteries. So
at the end of the day, Lei, the MPV form factor is the perfect canvas to launch new services, new features, new technology, new connectivity, because it's just a huge vehicle that allows you to be much more creative from a size and roominess standpoint. So the MPV segment in China was owned for the longest time by Buick and the GL8. And for whatever reason, no one else for a long time didn't really have a competitor. So
there's really two types of MPV segments. So the one represented by GL8 and the Honda Odyssey, these type of cater more toward the business people. And I'm also going to include the imported Toyota.
I forget his name.
Alphard. No,
Alphard,
it's not Toyota.
Yes.
It is Toyota. Alphard.
Yeah, the Toyota Alphard. Yep.
Which is kind of the nanny car, right? Rich people who are, And then there's the other MPVs, which is actually represented by the Wuling Hongguangs. So in 2013, CEM, they kind of resegmented the minivan and the MPV market, and they brought the Wuling Hongguangs over, which are really these vans, small vans. And now you're seeing these new wave of electric MPVs that are trying to disrupt the GL8's dominance on the MPV segment.
And let me add some color. If you're wondering why a family is limited to one child, they need an MPV, is because if you're rich, you most assuredly have a driver. And to Lei's point earlier, you have a nanny, or what's called an IE, which literally translates to auntie. And so there's 2 seats that are already taken in the vehicle. So if both parents are there and the child's there, there's 5 seats right there. And so that's why MPVs are an important segment in China.
And if you also look at the form factors, the Dreamer and the D9, if you look at the second rows are almost all captain chairs, right? Where you can lie down and stretch. So this is very unique thing that's different than the MPVs before. And now you just pile on these. First, it's electric, right? Second, it's pile on all these tech features.
Watch there be an ID Buzz L that comes out in a few years. Could you imagine that?
Yeah. So, but I don't know. BYD, if you look at their sales numbers, right? MPVs were not going to take a lot of those sales numbers. It's going to be these BYD seals, right? It's going to be these Tongs and Songs.
So their branding should not be forward in these Denzas. I would try to create a brand new, because I think people will have a hard time reconciling the BYD brand.
Remember that Denza also announced that they will have 5 different series.
Yeah.
So the DENZA. So the D9 will be the first. There will be SUVs, but just positioned higher than the BYD brand.
Right.
So good luck to them.
So let's talk QCraft.
Yeah, QCraft. I don't know what your impression is. I just talk about China Speed, right? This is a company that was formed basically 3 years ago. And now their robo-buses are running in Suzhou, Wuhan, Chongqing, Beijing. They just got a license to run in public roads in Beijing. And they just had the brand day yesterday, announcing that 10,000 renminbi.
Was it USD or renminbi?
No, 10,000 renminbi.
Oh, renminbi, sorry.
Renminbi, kind of taking a swipe at the Deep Route's $10,000 stack. But we need to make clear that these are different things, okay? The Deep Route's $10,000 is for a robotaxi, whereas the 10,000 renminbi QCraft stack, it's more for city-level
L2.
Yeah, let's say city level L2 plus that all these smart EV startups are kind of launching, even though the marketing says that they're using 10% of the cost to achieve 99% of L4. But I think it's over exaggeration. Hopefully, we'll get to talk to one of their people.
I actually sat on a panel with Dafang, one of the co-founders, middle of last year.
He's very young, right? He looks like a kid.
He's probably mid-30s, early 30s. So he's probably around the same age as Maxwell.
I know one of the founders, he looks like a guy, like a high school, just coming out of high school.
Yeah. But that team is trained in Silicon Valley. They all worked I want to say they all met each other at Waymo. So they do have some significant experience. They all have PhDs. So they're very, I want to say, technically sound. And they're the second wave of autonomous vehicle startups that jumped on the backs of the Momentas, the WeRides, the Baidu Apollos, and the Ponies. And I think they're just being much more aggressive because they have a bit more flexibility, because the first wave of AV companies really loosened the sector up, loosened the commercialization opportunities up for them. So
yeah, and also, right, that's a very key point you mentioned, that these guys have had the experience, and they've been they've come out of Waymo, I think Tesla, NVIDIA, and this
Baidu in Silicon Valley.
Sure. And one important aspect of this QCraft kind of, they call it the DBQ, driven by QCraft, right? The DBQ L4, whatever you want to call it. But they are all using first domestic LiDARs, right? RoboSense, 2 chips, Horizon Robotics, Journey 5. So these are all the companies that are moving fast, and they're moving fast together. Okay. And also worth mentioning that this 10,000, they have 3 different tiers. So they have a top that's going to cost a lot more because it has 5 LiDARs. They have a strengthened tier with 3 LiDARs, and they have a basic entry tier with 1 LiDAR only. I think that's the one that's 10,000 RMB. So there's a bit of marketing gimmick, but I think what we're seeing is these domestic companies along this AV chain are coming into play more and more and more, right? There's no more, we don't hear about Mobileye's, we don't hear about, well, NVIDIA's is still, important.
And you can bet that they're not as well capitalized as the first wave. So they're going to rely heavily on partnerships to get more of their technology on the roads.
Yeah.
So look for them to partner a la Deep Route and Baidu with SOEs, with OEMs, to get more of their hardware and software on the road.
Right. So they did announce the partnership with T3 Mobility, right?
Yes. So for the Western folks, that's the same as Argo working with Lyft, because T3 is a ride-hailing service that is a joint venture between Geely.
No, it's 3 state-owned companies.
Oh,
the FAW, Chang'an, and Dongfeng.
Oh, yeah. Geely has Cao Cao.
Yeah, Geely has,
you're right.
Cao Cao, its own, yeah.
Yeah, so the 3 state-owned enterprises that they were more or less a premium service, because I used them in Shanghai as kind of like a tryout, and they were using Hongqi's. But,
And the other one thing to point out of why QCraft was moving so fast on this AV space, only 3 years, I think what was mentioned at their event was their ability to do simulation.
Yeah.
Right. That's a very important part of this AV development, right? You can't just, it'll take thousands of years or hundreds of years if you want to do it all, on the roads, right?
But this is where it's going to be. This is where it's going to be interesting, Lei, because in the U.S., the United States government doesn't allow simulated miles to be counted as part of road-driven miles. So I'm wondering if China will diverge from that eventually, but I don't know. Well, from a robotaxi standpoint, we're still years away, but from logistics, delivery, vehicle, we're only a few years away, I feel. So because Waymo has millions of simulated miles, right? So they would be by far in the lead if they were able to count those as road driven miles. But the US government, I don't think is going to budge on that.
But again, based on the video that was shown by QCraft of their vehicle going through these kind of tight streets where there's all scooters going around, YMI brothers going around, it looked impressive, even more so than some of the other ones that went viral, right?
I got invited to try out their service because they had a bus pilot in Beijing.
Robobus.
After I had been on that panel and talked to Fang, and he invited me, and I should have taken it, but I obviously was like, oh man, I'll get a chance to do this, and they're in Beijing, so I can kind of do it anytime. But now, we're supposed to go down the deep route too, right?
Yeah.
Oh man. Anyways,
but I mean, this just shows you every time we talk about one awesome company, and then a few weeks or months later, we get to talk some other ones that are even more awesome, that are even, right?
Yeah.
It never gets old. You thought Deep Raw was impressive. Now we have QCraft, and then...
And you talk to these guys, they're the nicest guys, super smart, obviously, nicest people, because it's men and women. But and when you talk to them, how they answer questions, they have something to prove. And so I do see this competition between all these. We just talked about 6 of them. There's more than 6. There's a ton more than 6 that is really going to divide China into regions, provinces, cities, districts. It'll be interesting to see who's going to ultimately have the longest reach. Baidu, by far, because they're already an established company, or Apollo, because they have a big backer in Baidu. But Baidu doesn't really want to be investing all that money either. So they've already partnered with 3 OEMs, WM, ArcFox, and who's that third one? I forget the third one. But yeah. So, and QCraft really started with the robobuses, and now they're getting into more of the taxi services. So was looking at some of the stuff that's going on in the rest of the world. Jim Farley is launching a podcast to compete against us. No, I'm just joking.
No, it's all good.
Yeah, no, I'm interested in listen. It's going to be launching on May 25th. His first few guests are going to be like Tom Brady, Jimmy Kimmel.
Oh, that's nice.
So
it's very cross, right? What do you call it? Crossover,
Yeah, so it's kind of like how we had spoken with Elliot about who his first car was and stuff. So it's going to be that kind of theme. And Argo launched driverless pilots to shuttle their employees around in Austin, Texas, and Miami.
Yep, I saw that.
So that piggybacks off of Baidu, right? In China. So things are happening kind of counterpoint, China and US. And if we're keeping score, Argo has been invested in by Volkswagen and Ford. Volkswagen actually sold their AV team and business to Argo based out of Munich. So they have large operations now in Europe and in the US. Renault sold their operations in Russia for a ruble, but it's basically an option because there's a clause in there that says, depending on the political atmosphere, supply chain issues, we can buy back our 38% stake within 6 years. And Renault is actually a huge automaker in Russia. I did not realize that. So they sell Ladas. Renault helps manufacture Ladas, which is a Russian brand. And then, finally, just Tesla recalled 107,000 cars in China. So this is the second recall they've had in less than a month here. But again, it's not a traditional recall because they just flash the software and give us an OTA update. And this recall, though, is due to a bug in the infotainment system. So I think there's two people that asked me if I thought that the Chinese government was singling Tesla out. And I said no. I thought that there's just more cars on the road, more Teslas on the road, so more opportunity for failure. And the second part is they are likely just being learning and creating more scrutiny, full stop. So, but Tesla is the biggest dog on the block, so they'll likely be the ones that have the most recalls by nature of that statistic. So,
for Tesla, I mean, it's really, every time there's a recall, it's really nothing, right? It's because it's so much different.
Yeah, it's absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
That brings us to the end of this week's show. Lei and I thank you for tuning in. My name is Tu Lee, and you can find me on Twitter at Sino Auto Insight. That's SinoAutoInsight. You can find Lei on Twitter at LeiXing77. That's LEIXING77. If you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you grab your podcast from, we'd appreciate that as well. Even better, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends about it. Please join us again next week as we track down all the latest news on China, EVs, and more.